What do you recommend for people now that want to start an apparel company?
Oh man, well, my first recommendation is don't do it. Uh, but it's a really, really hard space to be in.
Today we've got a good guest that has a big brand name that you may recognize if you're a fan of any kind of combat or martial arts sports. Dan Caldwell, he's the co-founder of the huge brand TapouT that was really intertwined with the WWE and the UFC in the early days, and he's built that company to around 200 million in revenue per year, and then he was acquired in 2010. So I wanted to bring him on the show to come and talk about how to maybe start some of these brands, scale some of the brands, and maybe we'll even get into some acquisition and selling of a company and what that was like. So, Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Hey Tony, thanks for having me on, buddy.
So, I know that you made this post a couple days ago that you were a former police officer and that you had a lot of pride around that. And that was all before this branding started. So, let's start with that, man. What was the background there? How did you get into being an officer, then moving into being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, I always thought I was going to be an entrepreneur, and then in high school, I took a class on law enforcement. There happened to be an elective class, one of those easy classes you're trying to get by on. And I took this elective class on law enforcement, and I fell in love with it. I heard all these. It was really about this ex-homicide detective telling all these stories about how she had been one of the first homicide detectives in homicide, or female homicide detectives, the first female homicide detective in San Bernardino County, and she's telling all these stories about chases and all this. What sounded like fun to me, but I'd grown up. Cops was big at the time, watching, Adam 12 and SWAT and all these different police
Chips, come on.
shows.
You're Frank
Chips.
Poncherello. He had all the
Yep.
women. He had the coolest cars.
And just all of that, just kind of, I thought, I want to learn more about this. I want to do this. So I went down and kind of joined this little ride along program that they had. And I really got hooked. And I told myself I was going to put myself through the police academy. And that's what I did. I put together some money. It was about $3,000 at the time, which was, probably 12,000 bucks today. And put myself through the police academy and got hired on. I thought that was going to be the only thing I ever wanted to do. Then this show called the UFC came on, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, in 1993, and that was about the time I was going through the academy, police academy. And my best friend at the time, who I talked into becoming a police officer also, and he was going through the police academy and ultimately became a deputy sheriff. And we saw that first UFC, and we said we need to be learning whatever that guy's doing. That guy Hoist Gracie, who fought three guys that night and beat all of them, and he's like all of 170 pounds wet. He beat all three of these big, huge dudes who seemingly, if you just lined them up against each other, it looked like this guy was going to get killed. And so a week after that first UFC, we were training in Torrance, California at the Gracie Academy.
Hmm.
And we fell in love with the sport, but we never really thought, any more than we're going to use this for law enforcement. And a few years went by, and I'd been on the department for so it was probably around 1997, 98. I'd been on the department for a few years, and Charles came by my office and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting this t-shirt company. What do you think about doing this t-shirt company around mixed martial art? Well, but then it was called No Holds Barred
Yeah.
and Jiu-Jitsu." And so we decided to start this little clothing company, but it wasn't, it was obviously, it was like a side project. We were just
Yeah.
going to sell some t-shirts to our friends, go to these little tiny jujitsu tournaments and sell some shirts. And it just sounded like something fun, where we could be,
Yeah.
because what we loved to do, what we really loved to do was be in and around this jujitsu world and MMA, well, no holds barred world at the
Mhm.
time. And so we were just trying to find another way to find more time in that space, and that's where the t-shirt company came in.
Man, I love this story. I love that story because there's so many listeners right now that resonate with that. They're doing something, they have hobbies or passions. Like for me, it was cars, and I started business in the automotive space. And, so they're at that same point right now. So they're really listening to you. And, And one of the biggest things we kind of joke about now, and I know that you'll probably agree with me, is everybody wants to start an apparel company. Everybody wants to
Yeah.
create a t-shirt company. I mean, I'm wearing my own brands and things like that. See, and it's really one of the hardest things to start now. But back then, there wasn't a whole lot of competition, and especially that new space, the new no holds barred or early days of UFC for you. So, what do you recommend for people now that want to start an apparel company?
Oh man, well, my first recommendation is don't do it. Uh, but it's a really, really hard space to be in.
Yeah.
And short of, all the stars aligned for us, we are at the right place at the right time, attached to a sport that was grown, that was really at its infancy. And we held on to that 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 wave that was going off, and just clutched onto that like our lives depended on it, and really rode that wave of that growth, along with doing some right things. But in a lot of ways, I mean, you can't describe it better than we were at the right place at the right time. And that's not always the case for people. It's not, you don't always have this emerging sport that becomes, one of the biggest sports in history. Now today you can see where we kind of saw, I mean, we believe that it was going to be what it is today, but the truth is you're still always doubting. I mean, we had so many conversations, me and my partner, early on, where I can remember us, this is going to be so big. This sport's going to be huge. But at the end of the day, do you really know? You don't know 100%. And
No.
you're just seeing all the signs. And, lots of times as an entrepreneur, you're just using your best guesstimate. What data do you have to pull from to make a decision? And we were looking at, it was simple things for us, like just the fact that every time we showed it to somebody, like, watch this fight tonight, like they'd never seen, no one had ever seen the UFC at that time. So we would tell somebody to watch the fight, and we were like, one of the guys in there is going to be wearing our shorts and our shirt. He's coming in. Be sure you watch it. And they'd watch it, and they'd get done. They'd be like, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like that. That's insane. Like, I gotta, like, when does it come on again, or how can we watch that again? Then they would buy some shirts from us, and we just, that
It
contagiousness,
was
that
organic
this,
growth.
it lent itself to organic growth.
Yeah.
So we knew that if that could go off, because we didn't know, we weren't marketing guys or anything.
You had a bunch of broke fighters that you're like, hey, bro, we'll give you some cool clothes to wear if you'll wear them in the fight. And they're like, cool, I want cool clothes.
And I mean, just think about sponsoring anything like X Games today. You just trying to get into something like that. How much would you have to pay to get into a sport like that right now? And we were really at the right place at the right time. I mean, we're just regular dudes. We were two regular dudes
Yeah.
who had a lot, obviously law enforcement gave us uh some skill sets that maybe aren't typical of normal people.
Mhm.
But other than that, we were just two regular dudes. We didn't have any marketing background. We knew zero. I mean, today, if you put me in a t-shirt, a place to go print a t-shirt in a printing company, I would have zero clue how to print a shirt right now.
So I like this conversation, especially the old days of the before they called it MMA. That was amazing because this was literally like the reenaction of the Street Fighter video game. Because at that point, nobody knew which martial art was dominant, and I remember you had these giant dudes going against small guys, and then giant guys and big guys, and all these different fighting disciplines, and you had boxers and wrestlers and karate guys and kung fu and Muay Thai guys, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And initially the Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys kind of got made fun of because they're always laying on their back. I remember those
Right.
days. And then the rules were really limited back then. What was like no eye gouging or biting or something, or so they allowed like groin strikes and all kinds of crazy things. It was anything but gouging eyes or biting somebody. So it was really
Right.
it was like really a battle octagon, a cage, right?
Yeah, it was really as close as you could get to a law enforcement fight,
Yeah.
like when you get out in the street. And that's really why we gravitated to it, is because we saw it as, hey, this is the best training that we could have, because this is exactly what a police officer does to get somebody into custody.
Yeah. And back then the funny thing was is whenever they were announcing the fighters, every one of them had a career. So sometimes they'd be like, "This is so and so, and by day he's an attorney, and now he's here in this ring." So like nobody was making money at the time, but they were all enjoying that. But they all had professions.
Oh yeah, firemen, policemen,
Yeah,
grocery worker,
that's
karate
right.
instructor. It was a hodgepodge of different business people and livelihoods. But eventually it started to straighten itself out and it got
Hmm.
bigger and the sport grew. And luckily enough, we were right there when it really was about to blow up. And it was actually at its worst time in history is when we got into it. So it's not like I mean, to look inside, you would be like, this sport's about to be disposed of. This is not going to be around two
Yeah,
years from
it's too
now.
violent. I remember
Well,
like
yeah,
the headlines.
they were, you had guys like McCain coming out against it. But what happened the next year, where so you had both sides of that. You saw these people coming out against it, but you also saw that they just got a video game deal, their first video game deal, which kind of changed the landscape a little bit. And then the biggest thing that could have happened, Dana White and Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta came in and purchased the whole company, which nothing excited us more to find out that a couple billionaires and Dana White, who we didn't know too much about at the time, but come to find out, he was managing Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, so we knew he was in the sport. And these guys we knew they were all training in the sport, so we just knew that they were going to, have the best feel and have the money to really grow this thing. And if I remember having these conversations where we just say, if we can just hold on to these guys and not let them go, we'll grow with them and we'll stay with them, and our company, our business will grow just like theirs is. And they actually bought the company in 2001, and September 11th 2001, which is
Mhm.
you know
Yeah, the
the
terrible day.
the, the day where all the planes were obviously coming down, and very sad day for a lot of people. And I have kind of a love hate relationship with that day, because it was the first day we met with the Fertitas and Dana White in Vegas to really talk game plan.
Man, that had to be a rough day because all the excitement around the business and the industry, and then New York gets attacked and America's essentially under attack at the same day. And it's like you can't even really go out and celebrate and make these big announcements, so you feel like a big D bag, you know?
That's exactly how it was.
Mhm.
It was exciting, but yet, we're sitting in this huge conference room in Las Vegas in their new headquarters. It was actually, they own Gordon and Biersch Beer Company, and they converted the headquarters to use it as a UFC headquarters. And we're sitting in this huge conference room, just the me, my partner Charles, and Dana, Lorenzo, and Frank, and this big TV's on to the right of us, and we're just watching this whole thing go down. And so it was kind of it wasn't it was hard in that way, but we were so optimistic. There were so many good things said in that meeting, and it just really let us know that they told us, they said, you guys are the grassroots of what this sport is all about, and you guys will always be a part of this as long as we own this company. And they were true to their word.
So, what was your actual involvement when you came in? They just wanted to bring your audience because by that time you already had some audience because you had people watching the fights and the. I remember people buying the shirts, and so when the UFC and Dana White came in and they made you this deal, what was that conversation actually about? What were they trying to offer you?
I think they just really wanted to, we were the kind of the grassroots brand. We
Hmm.
were the only real brand, the recognizable brand that was
Yeah.
attached to the sport at the time. And we'd been in there since 1998. In 1998, our very first sponsored fighters were Jeremy Horn and Pat Miletich.
Hmm.
And Pat Miletich won the belt that night. So we were constantly, whenever they would have a show, they didn't have shows nearly as frequently as they have now. But at that time, when they had the show, we were trying to sponsor 2 to 3 fighters in every UFC. And it was exactly what you said. It was, we could sponsor a guy for somewhere between $5 and $1,000, to wear our stuff. We were kind of a second thought. The first thought was, we're going to make $2,000 for fighting in the UFC, and we'll have an extra $500 to go have dinner with, that night from
Yeah.
wearing these clothes. And maybe they had a couple other sponsors, but at that time, mostly all of the sponsored guys just had TapouT on, because they didn't, sponsorship wasn't really a thing.
Yeah.
So we had a little jump on the competition. And in 2001, when the Fertitas took it over, it was pretty much all anybody was seeing in the UFC. You only
Yeah.
saw two brands. It was either UFC or you saw TapouT.
Yeah.
And so that really helped us get a jump on that. And they just wanted to create this relationship where we had a little bit of a mailing list. So we were, any of our orders that were going out at the time, we would throw in UFC flyers. We were going to a lot of events other than the UFC. So if we were going to, I was doing a show in Hawaii where I would fly out with 2 bins full of clothing. And I would fly out to Hawaii to the show every 2 months called Super Brawl. It ran by TJ Thompson. And I would go sell our clothes out there. It was really like, we called it that's why I have this hand grenade on my hand. We called it throwing hand grenades. It was just a little, it was a hand grenade here and a hand grenade there. And, one hand grenade's not going to do a lot of damage, but you throw about 1 million hand grenades out there, you start to do a little bit of work. And so it was just about flying all over, doing all these different shows and really attacking this grassroots market. And they knew we were doing that. So they wanted us to go out with all these flyers and pass them out when we'd go to the events, and we'd give out flyers. Are you watching the UFC this weekend? And it was really about growing that. And then ultimately the real growth came from the Ultimate Fighter. The Ultimate Fighter really changed the game, because what they didn't realize at that time was, and this speaks true to anybody trying to grow anything, is that they didn't have any story. They had no story, no connection. You had a lot of these guys coming out, and not that they didn't have stories, but they weren't telling the story.
They didn't have the character.
They didn't. And nobody, I mean, they cared whether this guy won. I like this guy or I like that guy because he looked a certain way, but they didn't know enough about this person. They had a little 2-minute backstory they might do on the fighter before he fought. But until the Ultimate Fighter came, you really didn't really grab onto somebody. And people can still talk today about the guys that were in that first, those first couple seasons of the Ultimate Fighter, because I mean, even like Forrest Griffin or Stephen Bonner or Chris Lieben, you just remember those names because they told their story during the show. And then when they ultimately fought in the UFC, you rooted for those guys or you hated those guys one way or the other.
A lot of the sports that we watch, most of the sports we watch are based on character development. I mean, even people, I'm a car guy, so people are always asking me, do you watch NASCAR? And I'm like, hell no. Like that's not a racing sport. That's a character sport. All the cars are the same. They just put a different wrap on them and make them look a little bit different. But what people watch, because that's why grandmas watch it, is like, I like that driver. He's so handsome, and he comes from this state, and he did this and this and this. And so NASCAR and even WWE, where you were involved, they were very good at building characters and what people align with. They get attached to them, and then they root for them like fans. And even when I believe it was ESPN or Netflix that was started doing the NFL, kind of the preseason stuff, showing the camps of the NFL.
Right.
And,
Yep.
that whole series, each team was a different year, and then it started to build in these little groups of people that really didn't understand football, but they'd watch that show and they go, I like these players, I like that coach, and then they become a fan.
F1.
And
Yep.
so this is a very important thing that you're sharing right here, is building the character and the story behind what your brand is.
Yeah, it's really about story. I mean, that's because story you can apply to even a product or an owner, a founder. What is his story behind why he came up with this product? Or, even for us, there was a lot of layers to it, because it wasn't just about the fighters. We had our own story, and ultimately got us our reality show. We had our own reality show we signed a 3-season reality show deal. Unfortunately, my partner got killed before we could do our 3rd season, but we did 2 seasons of a reality show, and that told our story. And a lot, I mean, I still have people to this day, somebody just yesterday, I still have people to this day, literally yesterday, some guy, man, I loved your show so much. It's what really got me into the sport. And it was just us telling our story. And you can tell that story. I was watching a video maybe a week or so ago, about this product that was being made in Hungary, a skincare product, and something my wife was looking at, and they were just telling the story of how they had come up with this skincare product, and how people for hundreds of years have been using the waters of Hungary to help their skin. And it was just like, it was compelling. It was like I wanted to walk away. I didn't care. I was like, I don't care about skin. And then I wanted to walk away, but I couldn't. I was drawn into the story, and it was telling a bigger picture, and you can see how compelling it can be for somebody who's looking at a product, and you have to be telling your story at all times.
So rewinding a little bit, when you're first launching TapouT, you're going to these different fights kind of as an enthusiast at the time, selling handfuls of t-shirts here and there, trying to get the brand out there because you wanted to be there anyways. You're going to make some extra cash. How long were you still doing that before you were able to go full time and leave the police force?
I think I believed I was let go from a police department that was being taken over by the sheriff's department,
Okay.
and they kind of had a choice at that time. Hey, do we pick up this officer, pick up that up? Who they were going to keep on as a deputy sheriff, and I just assumed that I was going to be carried over into the sheriff's department, which was kind of exciting because my partner was a deputy at the time, but they chose not to pick me up because I was still kind of a young officer, and I was devastated. And I found another job as in law enforcement, but I was like, I just didn't want to be there, and I was looking to get out. So in I believe I left about 2002 or three. I was just looking to get out, and my partner had already quit too. So but I was keeping my job because I was somewhat supporting the business in some ways. We
Yeah.
were having a lot of cash flow problems. At the time, we didn't understand what the cash flow issue was or why we were having a cash flow issue. But, looking back, we were able to determine that it was really about an inventory. We were self-capitalized. We were financing our company with credit cards, which is like one of the worst things you can do. But because we constantly needed to increase our inventory levels as a growing company, we were wondering where's all our money going? Like, we're making a few $1,000,000 a year. How do we not have money to pay our rent? But after going back and you kind of an analyst in the business, we started to figure out, well, yeah, it's all sitting on the shelves back there. And after we realized that, there was some there was something that felt good about that, because you're looking back and you have all this stock back there, and I got millions of dollars of inventory. So we said that it's actually what made us create and go out and find somebody who could build us an inventory back in, because at that time shopping carts and stuff didn't have that. So we didn't have Shopify. Everything was built. So we had a fully hand-built website with a fully hand-built back end that didn't have an inventory system. So not until 2000, we weren't able to actually come up with the money to build it, because it was expensive to build websites back then. So I think around 2005 or six, we built our back end inventory system. And then we all of a sudden we saw all of our money. We're like, oh, there it is. Yeah.
It's not
There's
sitting in shelves.
$4 million worth of inventory sitting in our computer.
That's when you go digging through the inventory in the boxes and you find the one that's all dusty and you break it open. You're like, oh man, these shirts are like 5 years old, and you go market those as like vintage.
Yeah, and we
know?
did that too.
Yeah.
As your company gets bigger, you tend to find a lot of stuff hanging out right and left that you didn't realize you could sell.
Yeah, I wanted to accent that story because so many people have like this weird chip on their shoulder about not wanting to be an employee somewhere because they're an entrepreneur. Like you and I see this bull crap all the time nowadays. And you and I both started our companies while we were working for some other company. And I always think like, hey, if you're willing to do what it takes, then you'll get the result. And sometimes doing what it takes means getting a job. I mean, that's nothing wrong with that. And I like that you did this for a couple of years and you're kind of letting this thing grow, and you're still working in police force, and got this different job, but it was all to fund the dream. You could kind of see it, and you're willing to do what it takes, where most people will be like, well, I'm too good for that now. I want to be an entrepreneur. It's weird. Like, what do you think about that?
Oh, I think if you're one, I think it's a great idea to hedge yourself a little bit. Anybody who thinks that they should go quit their job, especially not so much if you're single, but having a family. Sometimes people starting their businesses later in life, and you got a family and kids and other people that are dependent on you. You should, don't be afraid to start a business while you have a job. In fact, I think that was some of the best ways. I used to carry my cell phone around, and I had a printed out order form, and as a police officer, I would get phone calls while I'm on duty lots of times I couldn't answer them, but
Mhm.
when I could, if I was just sitting in my unit and a call would come through, I would literally answer, uh, tap out clothing, and I would take an order by writing it down on a piece of paper, to take the order, because
Yeah.
we wanted to be available. So we had 24-hour answering service. So anytime, and I could forward the phone calls too to our answering service to take the orders if I wanted to. We'd set that up early on. But commerce, people at that time, people were still scared to do commerce. They were afraid to put their credit card in a computer, thinking it was going to be stolen. So we wanted to create other ways for people to be able to purchase products if they wanted to. So that
Yeah.
was just one of the things. I mean, we were willing to do whatever it takes to make it work.
And you mentioned the cash flow management issues, and most people that are kind of new to business, they probably don't really understand why that this is such a problem, especially with a business model like TapouT. Here's the simple version. You sell a bunch of shirts, but then you got to go pay to make more shirts. And if that order increases and people want more shirts, then you've got to have more money than you made on the last initial order to go print out more shirts to be able to have an inventory. Then those run out, and you're like, crap, we need to stay ahead of this. Like, we keep selling things and we don't have enough money to keep printing the new ones, and the orders keep getting bigger. So we're starting with small money, but we need bigger money. It's just this cascading effect. It just happens and happens and happens, and we start to look for ways to reduce costs, whether that's printing our own stuff instead of farming that out, or reducing the cost, or buying more volume of the shirts to bring the prices down per unit. So you can kind of see how this cash flow thing can get ahead of you when you're trying to build an inventory based business.
Yeah, cash flow is a killer. I mean, it'll cripple. I mean, I can remember thinking that success is killing us. How are we? Well, again, I couldn't pay my rent. Every penny was going towards just trying to keep food on the table, but also trying to keep the business running. And luckily, at some point, we got a factor in place that was an expensive way of seeding those. When we started to do business this way, we were an at once business for a long time, but we'd start to get POs for orders from different companies, and they were bankable companies. So when you start to have like a Champs, or different bank owned companies that were bank financed, could that could okay a factor, to be able to pay off some of those things. So when we put money out, or when we get that PO, we could actually turn in that PO and get cash for it. I think it was like 70 cents on the dollar, and you could get cash for it. And then we put a revolver in place. We took on a little private equity money and put a revolver in place. So we had this loan that was built against our inventory, which really helped a lot too. It was a little lower interest loan because it was built against our inventory, and we were able to bring in some money that way. So we were using all these different things. We weren't Our credit wasn't great. We didn't have a lot of things in place, but we did have inventory. We did have POs. We knew we had those two pieces. And then, of course, we had equity. So at some point, when we started growing to that point where we could bring on equity, it made sense.
So how long into the brand did you start to, I guess, do the in-house printing and becoming the manufacturer?
We really never did in-house
Oh,
printing.
awesome.
We did have an in-house printing leg, but it
Hmm.
was more so to keep up on smaller orders, or things that had a deadline, and that we needed to maybe supplement an order coming through. Sometimes people throw on an extra; they would add to an order at the last minute. We couldn't get our printer had already printed that stuff, so we
Hmm.
could do it in house. So we did have a leg. We had a full time printing setup, but we didn't do that until around 2007 or so. 2008.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, you built a company that almost got to 200 million in revenue, but you did it as a white labeler with different printing
Oh, we were doing
contractors
over 200. We were about 300 million in revenue.
right at
Uh,
the end there.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So
what kind of relationships do you have to build with these manufacturers then to be able to handle that volume? I'm sure it was multiple contractors bringing in product, but they had to be tough.
sorry,
Sorry.
forgot my charger for the computer here. What was the question? Sorry about
I
that,
said,
Tony.
so what was the process like to build the relationships with the suppliers to be able to handle that kind of volume? Because I think that's something that people are going to be curious about.
Yeah, I mean, it was always we just always had a great relationship with them. Some of our actually big, largest printers were growing with us.
Mm,
They became a company through what we were doing. So they built their company. I watched many of them get become these large printing companies on well, I don't want to say on the backs of TapouT, but
yeah,
that's kind of what it was. You know, we'd help. They were growing with us as we grew. They got took on larger buildings and became this larger force and took on more. You know, all of a sudden they're taking on other business, and I'm like, you know, we got you here. We need you to take this order. We need this by the 31st, and they're like, ah, but we have, you know, this guy just came through and this guy came through. We're like, yeah, but you wouldn't have that business if it wasn't
yeah.
for us. We need
Leverage,
this order.
right?
Yeah, I mean, we leveraged a lot of we had some power too in the industry. You know, we're obviously doing huge orders, and so it made sense. But yeah, we worked some really good guys, and we were excited about helping them grow too. We always we in fact we were responsible for in a lot of ways letting other companies know who our printers were because we wanted them to grow. We wanted them to do well because we knew they did give us their blood, sweat, and tears when it came to printing. They really pushed to get our. We had some. You know, there's a lot of things that come through when you're doing large scale orders with big companies. They have a lot of rules and regulations around how you can send out product and how it needs to be printed, tagged, and messaging and everything. So we had to work with them to make sure it was done right. And they really went beyond, far beyond what a normal printer does to really help those things happen.
Got
And
it.
we always appreciated that. So it was just a really good relationship. We always had good open lines of communication as we started to build out our team, and we
Mhm.
have people that they could contact at any time, you know, whenever they needed, they had an issue with our product or whatever. But the truth is, they could call me. You know,
Right.
I'm sitting there dealing with a lot of stuff. If our any of our printers, I knew them all personally. They were all somewhat friends of mine, and they could, if they had an issue or a question, or we had an issue on money, sometimes they'd just call me direct, and I would deal with those things myself.
Yeah. So I want to go through the typical phases of business growth and the thing that we focus on for growth. So we'll go from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Okay. So for that entrepreneur that's listening, that's 0 to 1 million, what was your main focus at that point?
Um, I think awareness and just, I mean, now let me preface all of this with we're not like we weren't great operators. We were
You had to learn
stumbling.
as you go. I get
We
it.
were
Yeah.
we were crawling, stumbling,
Right.
crying across the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
So take everything I say with a grain of salt because we were learning as we went. A lot of it was that 0 to 1 million was just awareness. Nobody knew who we were, so we were
Mm-hmm.
trying to get out there without running out of money. So we were
Right.
trying to find ways, you know, what would, and that's when I talk about doing those small shows. It was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them were just barely paying for themselves. It was just about really awareness, but making enough to pay for that awareness.
Just like
So
guerrilla marketing, boots on the ground, sweat equity. I mean, that's what I expected you to say of 0 to 1. So there had to be some shift between 1 to 10. You probably started hiring people at that point. Then what did your focus shift to?
we were definitely hiring people, trying to keep our head above water. We were having a lot of that 1 to 10. We were having so many issues with cash flow. We didn't even know how to deal
Mm,
with it. Cash flow was a huge problem. You know, you wanted to get closed to certain people. We were like, I'm not even sure. The biggest problem became I could get a big order right now, and I don't think I could fulfill it. Like that was the issue. And so it was figuring out around growing at a rate that we could handle, but still, you know, in some ways you wanted to just push on that gas as hard as you could. And you had to resist that just a little bit, you know, but still pushing as hard as you could. You know, still we were constantly pushing as hard as we could. I don't want to ever say we let off the gas,
yeah,
but you did have to be aware that you weren't going to be able, there was no use to going trying to go into Foot Locker today because we there was no way I could fulfill an order like
mm,
that. So getting those systems in place, that could fulfill those, and the back end systems. I told that was the time that we were getting our inventory system in place, all the back end systems that were important, and trying to put those in place while I still have the money to be able to produce goods and still create awareness. So it was all the things. It was more like just a bigger stack of stuff. We were realizing that we had to have back end systems that could support the growth. And that 1 to 10 was all about creating a lot of that.
So looking back on that phase, what would you consider key hires that you should have made or you would recommend someone make?
We were really good at, I think we did so much right. It was just, I think of having a good, not that I could afford a COO at the time, or, having the right person, dealing with some of that, but it was just having the right people in place if you can. It's important. Hold on one second.
Hmm.
My computer's going to go down if I don't get a charger right now.
Yeah, I get it. We got to keep the juice coming,
I didn't
man.
I didn't realize how fast this battery goes down when you're on
So,
Zoom.
so I like the what you shared so far because yeah, the 0 to 1s like the hustle and grind, sweat equity, beat the streets, make a bunch of noise, try to get some recognition on the brand. We get to the 1 to 10,
No,
you're kind of starting to look at different processes and implementing systems and hiring people to manage these different areas of the business to kind of grow it. And then now we're getting into the phase that most people are probably really curious about is the 10 to 100 million. That's a big jump there. So what was it
it
like
is.
navigating that and what would you recommend to somebody that's in that phase right now?
10 to 100 was a blur. Like it was a blur. You got to remember that we had a reality show. We were
Hmm.
sponsoring. We were the main sponsors of the UFC's reality show. We were on all the UFCs at the time. Our own reality show really changed the game for us. It was a
Hmm.
whole nother level at that point. But we brought in a president, and that was game changing for us. I think we realized we weren't the best operators, and we had a lot of other things going on around us. With our reality show, we couldn't put 100% of our time into it. I know without a shadow of a doubt that if we would have tried to continue to operate the company ourselves with our reality show, with all the driving and flying and all the things that we were doing, we would have definitely fumbled the football. I just don't think we would have been able to handle it. So bringing in somebody that we basically just created a deal that, hey, look, we're looking to raise our salaries and we'll par you on whatever salary we're raising, and we'll give you some equity.
Hmm.
So we brought in somebody who, and maybe it wasn't so smart because we probably we should have vested the guy and done all kinds of stuff. But luckily we had a guy in there who could help us. And he had built 2 companies to 100 million in the past, and it just made sense that somebody like that would 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 be a good fit in our organization, even though he didn't know too much about our business. He didn't know anything about MMA. He was an older gentleman. He didn't know anything about MMA really. We had to kind of, educate him on a lot of that stuff. And he didn't know anything about clothing. He wasn't from the clothing business. So maybe that wasn't the best thing, but he was the only guy we knew. We didn't
Yeah.
know anybody else who really had that type of business acumen. We didn't know the right guy probably. And, but we were growing so fast, we didn't know what to do. We just had to we just made a cold phone call and asked him if we could have a meeting, and told him where we were and told him what was going on. I said, we're about to have a reality show. It's about to hit. We're already doing X amount of dollars, which we're probably at, 6 or so, 7, 10 million, somewhere in there. And we're about to, like, things are going to go off right now. It's about to explode. And we'll par you at whatever salary we do. So if we can raise the salary, we're all up for raising our salaries too. I think we were making about $2,500 a month is what we could guarantee ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we weren't taking hardly any salary because of the cash flow issue that we were having. And so we were just taking enough. We were ultimately probably paying ourselves about 5,000 a month, but we were guaranteeing ourselves 2,500, and then the balance was like to eat. We just
Yeah.
use the personal cards to eat and stuff with. But once we brought him in, we kind of got a lot of that under control. We started to dial in exactly what our salaries could be, and we realized quickly, once we had a lot of that stuff in place, we bumped our salaries up to like $20,000 a month.
Hmm.
And so a lot of things happened pretty quick once we understood our cash flow issue. We got a factor in place. We brought in the private equity firm who helped us kind of balance those dollars a little bit. And then having some cash, we took some money off the table. So we brought in, took a few $1 million off the table.
Hmm.
And so that kind of changed the game. You know, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
2 months, you know, the craziest thing, you're sitting in a boardroom and I'm talking to my partner in this private equity firm's boardroom, and we're by ourselves in there and we're about to get this check for $1 million today, and or $3 million. And I said, dude, I can barely pay my rent, and tomorrow we're going to be, you know, making $20,000 a month, and I'm going to have $3 million in my bank account.
Yeah.
That was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It
Go
was
from
a crazy
broke to
day.
a multimillionaire.
It's pretty much what it
Broke for
was.
years and then
Yes.
becoming a multimillionaire in one day.
And that was all cash flow issue. It
Yeah.
was all just cash flow. It was
Yeah.
just not that we didn't have we were doing the revenues. The money
That's
was
right.
being made. It was just a huge cash flow issue.
You know, but that seems to be the real story with a lot of businesses out there right now. I'm a business coach myself, so I get to see a lot of the P&Ls. And funny thing you mentioned that you hired a president in that phase. I actually had a conversation with one of my clients today. He's doing a roll up and they're trying to build something to go present to private equity. And I had to explain to him that, hey, the CEO that you were from 1 to 10 may not be the same CEO from 10 to 100 or 100 plus. And what it takes is a humility and lower amount of ego to realize, like, I'm not the guy to get us there. I got us here, kicked ass, but I'm not the guy to get us there. And you had to have that same realization, and it worked out for you. And sometimes it doesn't, but I think a lot of times we have these founders that think that they're too special and they have the secret sauce and they try to hold on past where they're really, you know, got a lot of competence, and then they kind of nosedive the company beyond a certain point. So I love that you had the forethought to go, hey, we need to get somebody else in here. We're busy and we want to make money.
And it wasn't, I mean, I'd like to give us the credit for having forethought, but it was really just when you know you have an inkling that things are sliding through your fingers,
Hmm.
and not having a CFO in place, not having a COO in place, we were kind of wearing all these hats.
Hmm.
And I think the self-reflection was, listen, we're making the money here, we have revenues coming in, how do we not have CFO? Was actually not my decision, that was our president's decision. And I didn't realize how important what a great decision that is.
Yeah.
If there's one recommendation I could tell people is, when you can get somebody, either a controller or somebody, a CFO in there, somebody who can look at the numbers for you, unless you're a good numbers guy, which we
Yeah.
weren't. That is a huge, because those are the guys that helped us get those, that helped us get the P&E money coming in. They helped us create those relationships with the factoring companies, and without that, I don't think we would have made it.
Yeah.
The growth would have killed us.
It's a whole different language when you get into the private equity and all the different banking. It's a different skill set, different, you know, different mindset. And a lot of times we have these small business owners. I deal with like acquisitions and things that for some clients. They come in there speaking to a different language. And when I get to do the pitch deck to present their company to these PE firms, like I'm speaking a different language that my client doesn't even understand at some time. They're like, whoa, what is all this? And but you're answering all the questions before they have them when you do that. And they have their own terminology and they, you know, I get it. And it's intimidating because most people go, hey, I just want to sell my company. And they go, I think it's worth this. And they don't understand, you know, valuations and the multiples and EBITDA and all these topics start popping up. And they're like, whoa, I just want to make this amount. And is it worth that much? And to be real, like you and I both know, most companies aren't worth anything, unfortunately, even if they're making a good living, because they built themselves a good job. They're self-employed.
Mm.
They still got to hire someone to replace them. They have too much knowledge based in themselves. And so, hey, if you're listening to this and you're a business owner and you're making a good living, you could be making $1 million a year, but your company may not be worth anything. It's the hard reality, right? And
Yeah.
so now let's talk about that, because you sold your company in 2010 and you already knew this language because you had a CFO. You scaled past 100 million, or up, you know, approaching the two at that point. And What did it look like when the conversation started to happen about being acquired?
Well, it was really a conversation that I brought up because um, I was going through something. My partner got killed the year before, and I was just going through something. Originally thought after he got killed in a car accident that I wanted to like make him proud. I wanted to go
Mhm.
out there and like, I'm going to make him proud. We're going to build this company. We were gun ho. We went on a tour. We were doing all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
And I think it was kind of my way of dealing with what I was going through because he was also my best friend. This is my best friend growing up. I mean, not growing up, but for a
Yeah,
good part of my adult life.
over a decade.
And yeah, definitely. And we become police officers. We've been through so much together. He was training me when I became we were working as school security officers at a high school, and he's the guy who trained me. And ever since then we've been friends. We've been doing jujitsu together, and so watched the first UFC together, built this company together, and did this reality show together. We were together all the time, and just everything that had to do with this company we were talking about. It was our life. It was everything that had to do with our life. And when he passed away, I thought I could work my way out of those thoughts that were going through
Yeah.
my head. And I slowly realized that, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore without him. And so I just kind of got in this mindset where I didn't want to take on some of those decisions that we were having to make daily without him being there anymore. And so I just made the decision I wanted to start entertaining a sale. And so luckily enough, we were signed to CAA at the time, Creative Artists Agency, which is like the biggest um, agency in Los Angeles. They manage like guys like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise and all the big names. There's a couple of big ones out there, but I would say they're the biggest. And so they also have a leg of their company that deals with businesses, and so they started. We didn't have to really go out and look for buyers. They helped us in that through that whole
Yeah.
transition, and so having them on board helped out. And went through entertaining different people and interviewing different people and trying to see entertaining offers that were coming through. And we had a lot of people that were interested. I met with Jay-Z in Vegas, who was
Nice.
interested, which is crazy, like just another skin pinching moment where you're like, get a phone call from a guy that says, hey, can you meet Jay-Z in Tao for dinner? And I was like, I'm out there for like a UFC, I think. And so I'm like, serious? Like what? Yeah, he wants to meet and talk about possibly buying your company.
Mm.
So I go to meet him at Tao, and we were having dinner together, and I'm still like trying to like, he's the biggest
Yeah.
act on the planet at the time. And then he says, hey, we're going to go upstairs. I think it was upstairs at the time, where there was a big club there. And so we go to meet, and Russell Branson and Katy Perry show up. P. Diddy shows up, and we're all sitting there. I'm like, hold on. P. Diddy, Russell Branson,
Brunson.
Russell
Brunson.
Brunson,
Yeah.
uh, uh, and Katy Perry and Cedric the Entertainer,
You're like, what is
and
this? What kind of cartoon world am I
and,
living in right now? I don't
and we're
get this.
literally going through the kitchen. Like the movies where you
Yeah.
walk through the kitchen. We're walking through the kitchen to this freight elevator, jumping in this freight elevator with these huge bodyguards that are literally have to duck as they go in. They're the biggest guys you've ever seen in your life. They got to
Mhm.
be 7 foot tall, maybe 500
You're
pounds.
like, hey, bro, you need to be wearing TapouT.
I didn't want to look at them, honestly. And we walk in, and the elevator doors open up, and there's a billion people, and well, not a billion, but there's a
Yeah.
this club is packed to the hilt, and people are screaming out of their minds, and we're having to walk through the crowd to this table setup that they have for us, where just insane, unbelievable. And then Jay-Z and P. Diddy start freestyle rapping on the mic together, in with the DJ. I couldn't even believe it that I was there, and just another moment for the book, just kind of unbelievable moments that happen when you're, at the right place at the
And
right
that
time, I
that's an
guess.
acquisition conversation. That's not just like a party weekend in Vegas. Like you were there to do business, and that's how it ended up. It's good
Yeah, well, I
stuff.
mean, we're always. I think when you're, that's what's so fun about, and that's why everybody wants to start a t-shirt company or
Hmm.
some sort of company that's going to be, that has some piece of entertainment.
Yeah.
Like if you had a X Games brand or whatever, that motocross brand, you're going to be in and around those things that are
Hmm.
going on, and that's exciting.
It is.
And that's what makes it sometimes worth it to go through. It's a hard business to deal with. It's got a lot of competition, but it sometimes is worth it because you want to do that, because you want to be in and around those types of things.
Yeah.
And we were definitely, I mean, I was at the height. I was flying to Japan and China and Sweden, and doing deals in Germany and England. We were doing licensing deals all over the world for our brand. And some of them, at first we were shipping the product out there, but eventually we turned them into licensing deals. But I mean, having an international brand that's recognized because people are watching one of the greatest shows on the planet, it's like, it affords you things that you just never thought, a guy from San Bernardino as an ex-police officer would be able to have.
So I love this story, and so you eventually went through and you sold the company, and you know that that's a long process. I mean, all the due diligence, everybody's looking through all the numbers. It's an emotional journey as well. People are going up and down on their emotions when they're selling a company. And so, what is it like post acquisition? Let's say you get the wire transfer, you sold the company. Describe the emotional roller coaster, because I know you had one that goes on after that.
Well, I'll tell the one thing that kind of, the one great thing that gave me a slow letdown, even though, um, when the money came, I wanted to give it all back. I was like,
Mm.
I just didn't want to, I felt like, did I make the right decision? People, the worst thing, like people were printing in papers, uh, oh man,
Trying
just
to
like
estimate what
people,
you sold for.
no, they're saying, founder sells out,
Oh yeah.
and thing,
Oh yeah.
and it just, how did it, and they weren't using it in a term like, to me, when somebody else read it, I forgot how they worded it exactly, but it was, sells like a good thing. Like he sold out, sold his company.
Oh
I was
yeah.
reading it like sell out,
Yeah. I
every
have the
time I
same
would
thing,
read it,
dude. I
I'd be
get it.
like sell out. And so that was hard, selling what we had built was hard, not being able to make those decisions anymore. We went through a lot of
Hmm.
uh problematic things that happened in trying to create, changing hands in the business, and how things were going to be different. The one thing was that the saving grace was that I got to stay on as president for another 5 years.
Okay.
So staying on the company, even though it was operating different, it was a lot of figurehead stuff, but
Yeah.
I was still there
Yeah.
and still going to events, and doing a lot of the, handshaking and kissing babies and stuff,
Mhm.
do it, which there was something in that, some solace in that, but at the end of the day, it was still, there was a lot of seller's regret
Yeah.
after I sold the company that I still have till today. Like, could I have done things different? I mean, if you look at the state of the brand right now, it's kind of, the drink is due. We have a drink that's killing it. It's doing
Mhm.
really well right now, but a lot of the other pieces are suffering.
Yeah.
We lost a few years into that, after the sale. We lost the sponsorship of the UFC.
Mhm.
I 100% place that on the fact that Charles and I weren't,
Mhm.
eh, weren't
Yeah.
there.
It's a relationship thing.
It was,
Yeah.
we offered a significant amount, as to keep on as the sponsor, and it just didn't work out. I don't think that, but I think we would have offered any amount to
Right.
stay on board.
Oh yeah.
And now it was a numbers thing. What can we afford to offer
That's
that
right.
makes sense? And we didn't care. For us, it was marketing. It was a marketing that couldn't go by the wayside. That no matter what, you have to keep this sponsorship because
Yeah.
it's the business. Not having this sponsorship means you have no business, and that's kind of what happened. And then we
Mhm.
knew that. I knew that, but it was something that we couldn't. They couldn't, as the new owners, justify the
Right.
sale,
Yeah,
justify
they're
the
more accounting.
expense.
They get all tied up in the accounting. The private equity guys just think everything about numbers, and they
Yep.
don't really have the thumb on the pulse and understanding where the market's going or how important these relationships mean. And it just goes back down to the numbers. And now they're probably making less numbers because of their numbers. So
Exactly. It's a
so
downward spiral. And I still had equity too. So I was like in the parent company
mhm.
of and we were like, this company is like one of the biggest brand companies out there in the space now.
Yeah.
They own, I was their first purchase. And since then they bought JC Penney, they own Forever 21, they bought
Okay.
Reebok, they own tons of brand, big name brands. They bought Shaq. They just own all these different brands out there in the space now. So they're really a juggernaut in that space since they
Mhm.
purchased TapouT.
So what's next for you?
I'm look, I never count out that I've always said that, maybe TapouT won't be the biggest thing I ever do.
Mhm.
But the thing that is pulling me in different directions is I really want to spend time with my family a lot. I want to travel and do the things that I want to do when I want to do them. And I don't want to sell clothes out of the back of my car anymore. I don't want to be in that place. So I never know. I don't ever say never, but I'm doing a podcast with my wife, the Pretty and Punk podcast, for entrepreneurs with kids. It's really about navigating those challenges that it takes to run a business when you have kids, because it's a different type of running a business. And we are doing kind of an experiment for a new way of running a business where your kids are included and a part of the conversations, and because we're really trying to grow our future entrepreneurs. I didn't have a lot of that growing up. Everything was a separation. Like your dad goes to work, your mom stays at home, and we that's what I had growing up. I didn't know any different. But I this new world where you can have home businesses and create business from home, and it's really lent itself to us wanting to teach our kids, and our kids. My son Daniel speaks on stages in front of 3,000
Oh
people, and
wow. Yeah.
he's 6 years old, and speaking to 3,000 people up on stage. I want him to be able to communicate with people. I want him to understand today's marketing, and because it's different than yesterday's
Mhm.
marketing. I want him to understand how to grow a company, how why attention is important. I want him to understand why branding is important, why attention is important, why being able to communicate with people is important. All those things are important that you don't get taught in school. No one's ever going to
Yeah.
teach you that in school. And so the best place for we found for our kids to learn that is through us. And through us, best through us doing it as an example. We have them in the room when we're doing our podcasts. We have them participate in doing those types of things. We explain to them when we're doing meetings. I just recently met with Mark Wahlberg on a project, and I brought the kids. I wanted,
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
only did I want the kids to see, say that they had met Mark Wahlberg, but and go to his house and his place, and be able to have that conversation for their book, down in the future, but wanted them to just see how those conversations go. How do we create networking and create big business conversations so that they're not feeling intimidated like I was, and took me a long time to get used to for 10 plus years of having these conversations. How can they hit the ground running when at 18? We're seeing kids now. It's just, who is it, just watching somebody's kid who he's like 19 years old. His dad's like at least worth 500 million or so, and he's creating this. Now his son's worth 30 million, 50 million, you
Personal
know?
brand and business.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's 18 years old,
It's
you know.
awesome.
So it's like how are you going to do that? It's not about, and I don't want to put just money on it, but it's a way of keeping score a little bit. But at the end of the day, it shows they're doing great things
Yeah.
and being able to create a life for themselves. Man, if I could sell my company and do what I'm doing now, what if I could have sold my company at 22
And still do it.
and
Yeah.
be able to live the rest of my life, spending time with my family and maybe
Mhm.
still creating other businesses, which I have. I've created
Mhm.
lots of businesses. I have a real estate office, and we have a real estate fund where we flip homes and do other things. But all those things. But could I have done that at a younger age? And how exciting would that have been? So I want that for my kids. I want them to understand business and financial wealth, and how to learn a lot of things I didn't know when I was younger.
Man, you and I are alike in that regard. I always think that I wish in the public school system they had as entrepreneurship as an option because they don't teach you. They always kind of qualify you to go get a job and work for somebody, but they always should present entrepreneurship as an option. And I get that teachers don't have that education, but maybe there's some point in the future where guys like you and I are teaching things, whether that's on Zoom or online, and we'll be able to, give kids an option to be able to start businesses and share that experience. Because I didn't grow up with any money either, and I was the first one in my family to even go to college, and I paid for it myself. And so I had to learn just like you through the hard ways and getting punched in the face a lot and making bad mistakes. And I said, man, if public schools could teach leadership, like real leadership and entrepreneurship, there would be a completely different society right now. And that's something I would love to work to eventually.
100%. Like these guys, and I had it. I actually changed high schools
Mm.
to go to like what they call the rich kids school,
Yeah,
Redlands High School, which was near me at the time. I was going to San Bernardino or San Gregorio and San Bernardino, and I changed high schools because they had an entrepreneurial class there.
very cool.
And it just so happens that I took the law enforcement class too, and it kind of won out in my brain, car
Yeah,
chases and fights and robbers and stuff.
stuntman
What?
personality.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it made me go that direction. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They should have this. And I think a lot of the reason they don't right now is because it's like anything, it's like trying to, I'm sure you ran against this, trying to find good marketers. Any good marketer or anybody who knows, good how to build the top end funnels and good marketing, they work for themselves and built their
oh
own
yeah,
brands
yeah,
because you can't find good guys because as soon as they get good, they go start their own brand, do their own
always,
thing. And
always.
so trying to find guys that are good, and it's the reason why this guy, he was decent and he understood it, but it was the guy that ran the student store. So it was like a teacher who also ran the student store who was teaching a class on entrepreneurship, which I
Nice.
still thought I thought was awesome. Having your final paper to be turned in. Your final was actually just a business plan
Yeah.
on at the end of the year. So I thought that was the funnest thing in the world. And every kid should have that opportunity. But yes, could it be done so much better? Of course. It's just finding the right people to do it. Maybe it's people giving up of their time, to go out there and make that happen.
Maybe so. Maybe that'll be something we collaborate on in the future. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been fascinating, and sharing the story and the insight and the growth and acquisitions, and so I really enjoyed this. So thank you for being on the show, man.
Thanks, Tony, for having me, buddy.